welcome everybody. My name is Mike Hughes. I'm a partner in Developing Global Leaders Asia, and I'm going to host this 30-minute webinar now with Dr. Zsuzsanna Tungli, who is the author of the book, The Culture Key. So the purpose of the next 30 minutes is to, first of all, do about 20 minutes where I will ask some questions to Zsuzsa, and she'll tell us a little bit about the book and what's in the book. And then there'll also be an opportunity for people to put questions in the chat. And then I'll pass those questions on to Zsuzsa towards the end of the session. So a brief introduction. So Zsuzsa is the managing partner of Developing Global Leaders Asia, which is a global leadership consultancy based here in Singapore. Born and raised in Hungary, Zsuzsa started her career in journalism and finance before completing her PhD at London Business School in international business. She moved into consulting and training about 25 years ago and has worked with multiple multinational companies and leading learning institutions such as INSEAD and IMD in Europe and SMU and NUS here in Singapore. So without any further ado, I'll ask the first question to Zsuzsa. So what inspired you to go into this field of global leadership?
Thanks very much, Mike. And let me just say hello to everyone as well. And thank you for all checking in from the different countries, different locations. So I'm thrilled to have you. I see so many friends and acquaintances here on the call as well. So thanks very much for joining us. What brought me into this field actually started long time ago. It was when I was working for the accounting, one of the big accounting firms, and as the Hungarian employee, as I am Hungarian, I had to accompany a lot of our colleagues and investors also to meetings to meet, and these are typically meetings of ministers and GMs, etc. So high-level people. And I remember one particular occasion when I was accompanying a group of American investors to a paper factory in Hungary. Now that was some years ago, and I don't know how well you know Hungarians, but we like to be, I think we are quite friendly. We like to host people, so there were sandwiches on the table, there was coffee, there was biscuits, all kinds of things. And the Hungarian leadership team wanted to have a chat with the American investors. And I could see that they were getting quite uncomfortable, the Americans first, because they scheduled 1 hour for the meeting and they wanted to discuss business. The Hungarians wanted to chat and build relationship. And so both sides were beginning to feel a bit strange during the meeting. The Americans thought they were, the Hungarians are perhaps not serious, not wanting to talk about business. And the Hungarians didn't understand why the Americans were so cold and not asking any questions. Now, luckily, I had the opportunity to actually talk to both parties and explain that we have different expectations towards the meeting. Both parties actually want to go ahead and do something. So that was one of the reasons when I thought, that financial competence is good, but perhaps not enough. And then I was part of a project where we were evaluating a company, and the foreigners didn't ask Hungarian input. And imagine when you do an evaluation without, or with the wrong assumptions, without knowing the context, how people would react, etc. And okay, then I thought, I felt this horrible knot in my stomach every now and then, like, oh my God, what is my foreign partner going to say? And I thought, okay, I move into global leadership, and I never looked back because I just love actually this field.
Okay, so that's what inspired you. So now maybe tell us a little bit about the book itself. So can you kind of tell us briefly kind of what the book covers and how the book is structured?
The book is a practical cross-cultural guide for anyone who is basically working internationally. So whether you are leading a team, multinational team globally, or you're working with different nationalities in your office, or even you're just communicating via email, but with different nationalities regularly. I think it's a practical guide with lots of case studies and examples, and asking you to reflect on certain things as well. When I chose the most important cultural differences which the book covers, I was having Asia and West in mind as different areas. And the 4 big differences which I chose, and I know that a number of colleagues in the same field are actually also on the call, so I look forward to your feedback, of course. The first one is indirect and direct communication. The next one is the different approaches to hierarchy. followed by the different speech patterns, especially how we use silence in communication, and finally, whether we have a priority for task completion or building relationships. And the book is structured around these differences, gives lots of examples and also some advice how you can actually overcome these differences.
Okay. So how could you suggest that the culture key could be used by the reader? How could they practically use the book if they're working in a multicultural environment?
Well, I hope that the book itself would be actually okay, just to read as well, and it would be entertaining and interesting and useful enough. But the way I wrote the book is actually a workbook. So if you do take the time, there are a lot of exercises, there are a lot of questions to reflect, and even like I encourage the reader to have action points. I'm a very practical person, so I always ask for action points. What are you going to do differently? And I think we actually started using this book also part of our programs because we find it's a good accompanying book for our cross-cultural global leadership initiatives. So I think if you use it as a workbook, that's perhaps the best way to move forward in the intercultural communication.
Okay, so last question from me, and then we'll come on to the questions which I see are appearing in the chat already. So how is the Culture Key book different from other books on culture? Because there are many books out there. Why is this one new compared to the others?
Yes, there are a lot of very good cross-cultural books, which actually is good because I think everybody takes something different, perhaps from each book. I think, as I already was saying, probably my personality comes into the book. So it's very practical. It's very practical. It talks about real life situations, everything, all the examples which I quote come either from my experience or from my clients or friends. So it's very much practical. We talk about everyday concrete situations like recruiting, promotion, evaluation, meetings, setting up joint ventures. So very much, again, related to practical everyday work. And it is also focused, perhaps in two ways. One is I only address these main cross-cultural differences. So I hope that the reader actually doesn't get lost and is able to retain and think about these differences. And there's also that focus between Asia and the West. So, and it's a workbook. So I hope it's practicality and workbook focus perhaps gives a little bit of extra edge. Okay.
Great. So thank you everyone for who's sending in questions. So I have a few here which I'll quickly go through with Zsuzsa. The first one I saw Andrew, thank you Andrew for sending that through, was asking whether you're using an existing cultural model or whether this is your own interpretation of your own model.
Thanks very much for asking. It's my interpretation based on the experience I've had over the 25 years. And you could say it's a mix of different models because, of course, there are many, many very, very useful models. I found that in the companies, nobody has enough time anymore to actually really look at models, etc. in detail. So basically, I was trying to be as practical as possible. I use the cultural dimensions as a framework, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with.
Okay.
But I chose the ones which I believe are most important for this book between Asia and the West.
Okay, next question then is, do you cover bias in the book?
Mm-hmm. You know, I was relatively... Jackie, thanks Jackie, nice to see you as well. You know, I was relatively proud that I wrote some of the beginnings of this book before bias came into more awareness around the world. I mentioned that basically cross-cultural bias is one of the biggest biases we have in international life, and we don't actually know about it because, you know, even on the surface, especially in places like London, Singapore, you would see so many different nationalities, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually are able to know why people do things. And based on our bias, we just try to do our best. So yes, I do mention at the beginning of the book that basically it's a cross-cultural subconscious bias we have when we are interacting with others.
Okay. Amanda asked the question, would this be a good addition to accompany expat cultural awareness programs?
Thanks, Amanda. And again, I'm very happy to see you here as well. Yes, you know, we worked actually together with on different expatriate programs as well. to be honest, if I could, I would really think it would be helpful to give it to give this workbook to everybody's hand, everybody who's moving across or just interacting internationally, because it creates a basic knowledge. So it's like culture 101 if you want. And based on this book, then you can also add a lot more like country specific, maybe knowledge. So as a basis, I would definitely recommend it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question as well. So if there was one piece of advice which you'd give for somebody working in Asia, maybe from the West, or what would that piece of advice be?
First of all, I want to acknowledge that I am fully aware, of course, that Asia and West is huge generalizations. And in the book, I give also a lot of more explanation why I do this, and a lot of country-specific examples. When you come to Asia, maybe I refer to our own example. When we came here to set up our own company, which is now 11 years ago, of course, we were aware, we had to be aware that in Asia, hierarchy is very important, relationship building is extremely important, but we didn't know anybody except for one friend from India who happened to live in Singapore. So basically, we started from zero. And even with all that cross-cultural knowledge, I think I did underestimate the time it would take to build those relationships, especially because the subjects like global leadership, cross-cultural competence at that time really weren't so much talked about. And we had to get to the decision makers to get some assignments to work with them on different projects. And we found often that the maybe lower level management people who would talk to us, they would maybe not go to their directors because they weren't sure that the directors would be actually interested in these relatively new subjects, or they wanted to see us live in action. And we just arrived in Singapore, and yes, we had references, we had some videos, but they wanted to see us live in action, which of course was not a bit challenging at the beginning, but luckily we got there in the end. But I think it really is true that whether you are a single entrepreneur or you're representing like a big organization, when you come to Asia, you really have to budget that extra time to build really proper, solid relationships before even you can really do good business here. Okay,
thank you. The question following up kind of from that question was around, so your definition of Asia and the West, how broad is that, or how is that defined?
Thank you very much. I use the definition like a geographical definition. So when you look on the map, I would say anything from starting from around India till Japan. So it's a geographical definition of Asia. And then like Australia or the Arab world and everything else would be already not in Asia. Okay. I hope that answers it.
Maisie asked the question, do you discuss power distance as one of the cultural dimensions?
Yes, I actually believe that power distance, or I refer to it as hierarchy. And the reason I do that is that I try to word all the cultural dimensions in a language which anybody, any layperson can also relate to. And I thought that perhaps hierarchy is the best. So absolutely, you can't not talk about power distance in the Asian culture. I actually think that probably hierarchy, power distance is perhaps the most important in competition with the difference in direct and indirect communication styles. So yes, absolutely, it's one of the bigger chapters in the book.
So a question from Jose in Switzerland. Does the book cover any example on Germanic countries with business culture?
Yes, so the examples are all country specifics because they happen somewhere. And the immediate one which comes to my mind is that a German executive is asking for feedback. I think in the book I use an example of a Malaysian employee not giving feedback to her German boss, and the boss really wasn't very happy about it. But of course, as he later found out, that the employee basically didn't want to hurt the boss with the critical feedback, which of course, as a German boss, he really wanted. So I give probably a lot of German and some Swiss examples as well, because to be honest, when you come to Asia, there are certain cultures which I think are perhaps having a little bit harder time, which are like really different in terms of hierarchy and setting and also how they communicate. And Germany would be actually one of those cultures that they get misunderstood all the time, I think, or Germanic cultures as a whole, they get misunderstood by a lot of Asians.
So just linked to that, I saw Grace put a question in. So when you're talking about the West, do you just mean Europe?
No. Basically, I guess the whole Europe, the Americas, Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think a very nice question here from Juliet. I like this question. Can you give any examples of cultural differences that can be turned into positives to bring the best out of both cultures?
Yes, I think if we are aware of our differences, then actually everything can be turned into a beautiful collaboration. Like one of the examples I start the book with and then finish it with it as well is a teleconference. And I'm sure that and I chose this example before the pandemic hit, and I'm sure that now it's much more relevant. And I hope that you haven't experienced too many conference calls where people are dominating the conversation and others are not able to say anything, or they don't seem to want to say anything. Now, without that awareness, I find it very difficult to turn anything into a big positive. I wrote this book to create that little awareness. Once you're aware that certain people have different styles than the others, and you are willing to adapt, then that little cultural awareness can go a long way, and suddenly you have a very interactive and engaging collaboration. And in my work, I actually see that people are really open to learning. I am actually very positive about that. And I think my belief is true that people are more ignorant than arrogant. So people are willing to learn, but if they don't know something, then they unintentionally cause hurt, or I mean, business deals get lost and careers get also derailed, unfortunately. So awareness needs to be there for turning things into positive, I believe.
Okay. Another question, a little bit linked to Grace's question earlier, which is, do you discuss differences between the US, American, and European, and how that differs in the way they deal with Asia?
Oh yes, it's not in detail discussed in the book, although some of the examples probably imply that difference. You know, I'm just happen to work with a global leadership team. The majority of it is British, and then there are a couple of Americans on it. And even the British were telling me how the Americans deal differently with the Asians. So I think sometimes the bigger the difference between the cultures, sometimes that can be good if you are open-minded and willing to learn, because then you figure out how to deal with the other cultures. But I must say that unfortunately from the American side and even from the British side, I don't always see that they seek out that information. But I wouldn't want to blame either nationality more. I think it really depends on the openness. Certainly we find a lot of work actually, unfortunately, due to the fact that multinationals, really UK and Americans as well, want to do things their way, and they don't let Asia do what they perhaps should be doing as well here, because the Asians are not communicating strongly enough their needs or wishes. I hope that's kind of answers.
Okay. You like this next question because I know it's an area you're very interested in. So this is from Vladimir. Is Russia in the middle between East and West, or is it something special?
Special, Vladimir, of course.
And that was part of your PhD, Russia, wasn't it, as well?
Yes. And then we studied together with Vladimir. You know, even Hungary, I think, is a little bit in between, because in the book as well, I talk about 3+1 cultural difference, and the +1 being relationship and task orientation, because I think actually the whole Eastern Europe, if I may say that, and again, I know I'm generalizing, has that warmth, that need for relationship building. And I think that actually helps us here in Asia, because you don't need to tell people from Latin countries or Eastern Europe that you need to go out for lunches, for coffees, to talk to people, to build relationships. That's normal for us. We have to do that. Where some other cultures like North European countries or North America wouldn't necessarily think of it. So in that sense, we are this way. But then, you know, Russians can also be quite direct and emotional and all that, and that would not be very Eastern. So let's say in between, yes.
And it's a country that stretches all the way from
yeah,
west to east.
Exactly, and again, I would have to be very careful, because probably somebody from Moscow or Vladivostok would not be exactly the same either. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then we'll slowly bring the discussion to a close. One is from Michelle. Do you observe similar differences with millennials, or are they more global?
They are more global. They are more global. I think the fact that we have internet and we have so much more information at our fingertips, that helps. So on the surface, we know more about different cultures, and that if any knowledge is good, because that can help us interact with different nationalities. But when I work with millennials, to be honest, they don't know much more about why, because we need to know why actually cultures are behaving differently. So it's not enough to know that you are indirect and I am direct. I need to understand that I am indirect because I want harmony, and my mommy, daddy wanted to bring me up that way, or I'm direct and I want to be honest because that's the most important value for us. So that understanding is not there unless people look into it. So more awareness on the surface, but the in-depth knowledge is also not there, I find. Okay,
and the last question from Grace again. Have you also covered the aspects people have to be mindful in cultural differences at virtual meetings, which is obviously very topical. Thank you, Grace.
Yes, no, absolutely. And, you know, actually, that's one of the things which put us at a relatively good position at the beginning of last year when everything gone virtual, because I personally have been working with global leadership teams for over 25 years. So the virtual meetings as such are not new, now just much more widespread, and even locally there are virtual work teams as opposed to between different countries. So absolutely, the book itself has a short list in the main part, and like there's an appendix about what should you do pre-meeting, during meeting, and post-meeting, if you want to make sure that your virtual meeting, especially across cultures, is going to be successful. Yes, it's definitely there.
Okay, so thank you, Zsuzsa, for that. So thank you, everybody, for all those questions. Some excellent questions there, I think. So the book is now available on all the major e-commerce platforms like Amazon, of course, and also iBooks, Barnes & Noble, and some others. And you can also buy the book in Singapore directly from DGL Asia. So all you have to do is just either write into DGL Asia, or we'll send you a link which will allow you to buy the book here in Singapore directly. And for those of you who are in Singapore, we're offering that you can basically get the book for 25% discount if you buy it directly from us in January. And I think someone actually mentioned about whether Zsuzsa could sign the book. So we'll put in a free signature in every one of those copies as well. So details about buying the book should be coming on the chat now, and also we'll send it to your LinkedIn email or your LinkedIn addresses as well, so you have that information. If you do have any other questions or anything else you'd like to talk to us about, then please feel free to contact us. Again, the contact details you will, I'm sure, have, but we'll put it into the chat as well. And with that, I would just like to say thank you to Zsuzsanna again, and thank you to everybody for attending, and we wish you a great rest of your day. So thank you. Bye-bye.
So thanks very much for joining me, and thanks everybody for joining me. I really hope that we keep in touch, whether it's via Zoom, LinkedIn, or hopefully also live. I wish everyone a great year, a much better and a really fantastic 2021, and all the very best. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Bye.